Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. This week, President Obama will go to Israel. He'll be talking about the peace process, but perhaps more importantly about Iran and its nuclear issue and Israeli attitudes towards it. On today's interview, we're going to talk about that with a man who studies these things very carefully, Raymond Tanter, who is a visiting professor at Georgetown University and adjunct scholar of the Washington Institute, but who's also served on the senior staff of the National Security Council and worked as personal representative of the Secretary of Defense, both during the Reagan and Bush administrations. You are also Raymond Tanter, co-founder of the Iran Policy Committee. Thank you very much indeed.
It's my pleasure.
For being our guest today. Looking ahead to President Obama's visit, we've just heard about the new Israeli government. Pro-settler groups have done very well in this new coalition. Looking ahead to what hopes the American president may have of kick-starting a peace process long stalled by settler issues, it seems as though this process is dead in the water. The two-state solution is increasingly talked about as an unlikely outcome. Is there any chance that President Obama can hold any sway over Benjamin Netanyahu on this issue?
Well, one trip does not progress make, except if the trip were dedicated, and I think it is, to the idea of gaining the trust of the Israeli public, then he can come back and make what I call a humongous step on the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. But right now, the Israelis don't trust him.
For now, this is probably more about fixing frosty relationships.
Precisely.
The other important issue will, of course, be Iran. This is one of Benjamin Netanyahu's pet issues. He's been talking about it for many months, trying to raise awareness, warning about the dangers of the Iranian nuclear threat. President Obama himself has warned in the last few days that Iran could have the bomb within a year. Do you think that the rest of the world has paid sufficient attention to this?
Well, let me go back and tie the two issues together. Once you develop trust with the Israelis, you can get more time to keep Israel from launching some kind of a strike on the Iranian nuclear installations. For example, President Obama will visit Mount Herzl, which is tied to the idea of the founding of the Jewish state in terms of history, rather than simply talking about the Holocaust as a motivating driver for the founding of the state. That is music, poetry to the ears of the Israelis, okay? Once he has gained their trust, he can say, look, I've got your back, to use an American phrase. I will pick the time and place to launch a preemptive strike against the nuclear installations of Iran if I discover that Iran is about to acquire the bomb. But at issue is, what is the bomb? And President Obama defines the bomb differently from Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Obama says that the bomb is of three parts. Highly enriched uranium. Iran has about 170 kilograms of uranium enriched at a medium level now, and it needs about 250 kilograms enriched at 90% purity. It means the bomb means a trigger, that is something to detonate the fuel, and the bomb means a delivery system, ship by missile or what have you. And President Obama says we will prevent, American government that is, Iran from acquiring the bomb defined that way. But Prime Minister Netanyahu says, wait a second, we don't know whether Iran is enriching in a secret place, and I think it is. We don't know whether the trigger detonation engineering in research and development is being carried out successfully under a mountain, and I think it is. We don't know whether Iran can marry the fuel and the trigger to the missile delivery system, and I think that President Obama is right. It's very technically difficult to do.
So in your view then, Professor Tanter, you believe actually that the Iranian nuclear threat has been underestimated by the current American administration?
No, I don't think we've underestimated that the American intelligence has underestimated the threat. The issue is the interpretation of what the threat means. Do you have more time as a result of the threat? I think we have, well, let me back up. Israel has lost its window of opportunity. Why? Because Iran has buried deeply into a mountain all of its installations for the purpose of building, trigger, and enriching uranium in the sense that the UN agency won't be able to detect it necessarily. So Iran could break out from the straitjacket in which the inspectors have it, and that could be a tragedy. And
that would be a tragedy. Would you? You've written a great deal about the fact that, I mean, sanctions have done what they have. What you suggest is that more attention be paid to opposition parties within Iran. That helping to destabilize the regime from within would be a good thing.
Yes, I think regime change from within ought to be on the table. When President Obama says all options are on the table, he means negotiations, sanctions, and more importantly, military action. But what about a fourth option of regime change from within? And that means understanding the nature of the Iranian society and the politics of that society, and not picking winners and losers, but trying to work with all of the opposition groups. And for too long, we've ignored the main opposition group that is able to draw upon its experience of having brought down the Shah of Iran, and that is called the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen have the experience of having brought down the Shah, has the expat community behind it. In June, for example, they hold a rally each year near Paris, near Charles de Gaulle at a big convention center, and they get 100,000 people there. And I've tried to look at expat community rallies elsewhere, and they can get 100 people at most. So this group, the Mujahideen, has to be brought into the picture. They are the most experienced. They are the ones with the expat community support.
Isn't the trouble for the American administration that the notion of helping to affect regime change in other countries has become a difficult one? We've just marked the 10th anniversary of the start of the war in Iraq in 2003. One of the consequences of what happened is that the idea of hawkish American foreign policy, in the sense of seeking a regime change for regime change's sake, has lost credibility.
Yes. Regime change from without, that means sending in the 4th Infantry Division and meet up with the 2nd and the quash Baghdad. That's off the table with respect to Iran. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. It's a mountainous country. You can't invade Iran successfully. You barely could do it in Iraq. So what you need is regime change from within. And I don't mean regime change like the coup that resulted in the democratically elected Mossadegh government being overthrown in the 1950s by the UK and the United States. I mean stimulating the Iranian opposition groups to put their heads together and work to change the regime. And people say, look, there's not enough time because the nuclear clock is ticking faster than the regime change clock. I say, no one is able to say when a rotten government is about to fall. We could not understand or predict when the Soviet Union fell apart, when Ceausescu's Romania fell apart. And so therefore, it's very important to put the regime change clock on the table. And that means getting the expat communities to try to help with their brothers and sisters in places like Tehran.
Looking at what President Obama specifically can do within his second term in terms of foreign policy, we've had this 10-year anniversary after the war in Iraq. He's facing all these challenges. You've written a great deal about rogue states. The days when the term axis of evil could be used and America could pursue these very aggressive policies towards what it deemed were rogue states are simply over.
Well, I think President Obama's phrase now, it wasn't his, it was the staff aide, is leading from behind. I think he did a very good job on Libya. He helped the French do their thing in Libya. He helped the French now in Mali. So he has lowered the profile of American power and stimulated the other European countries, particularly Britain and France, to do the heavy lifting. And that's what's happening in Syria right now. So I think that the idea of American firepower being used to overthrow a regime is over. But it's very important on Iraq that we make sure that the Mujahideen's group, about 3,000 of them languishing in Iraq right now, are taken care of in a place called Camp Ashraf, Camp Liberty. And if you want to preserve that group, to use against the regime later, it has to survive in Iraq. And that is an untold story that I hope France 24 can help tell.
And for President Obama, then, even if the means have changed, even if the ambitions have been lowered, even if the attempts to be involved are more subtle, the point is, according to you, that he needs to keep his eye on the ball and on what is happening in these hotspots around the world. And yet he will be facing increasing pressure at home. You have these isolationist movements coming back into American domestic politics, the suggestion that perhaps it is time that America withdrew, having overstretched itself quite as far as it did. This is going to be tough for him.
Well, President Obama was elected under the idea that he wanted to leave his legacy as a healthcare president, getting the economy going, and he wants the second term to be like that. But the Middle East is not going to allow him to do that. You have Kim Jong-un, the 27-year-old wannabe rock star, trying his best to gain prominence through nuclear testing, missile testing, and who knows what North Korea is going to do next. Then you have Iran on the table, and then you have Egypt. Egypt is going pretty well right now. But it could boil over. The Sinai Desert is a hotbed of international terrorism. I used to walk around the Sinai with the Bedouin, and I now discover that it's one of the most dangerous places because it's such an open place for al-Qaeda wannabes that you can imagine. The Syrian-Israel frontier is becoming a dangerous place for al-Qaeda of Iraq to come in. So President Obama may want to leave his legacy on the domestic front, but he, like President Hollande of France, might have to go places with force, even though they would not like to.
Raymond Tanter, thank you very much indeed for having been our guest today. I do hope you'll come and join us over the coming months as we look ahead to Iranian elections and so on. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of today's France 24 interview, but we'll be back very soon for another. Goodbye.